I've been riding big adventure bikes the last 7 years, and this is what I've learned. Now let me just get into a little bit of history. I rode when I was a little kid, had mini bikes, go-karts, stuff like that, but once I turned 16, I didn't ride until I bought a motorcycle in my 40s. I'm an average rider, intermediate at best. I got some experience with different bikes and stuff, but I'm no professional by any means. I did start with like a Honda 500 street bike that I bought when I in my 40s, but I wanted to tour. I wanted to travel the country, and so I went to a BMW GS Adventure. I essentially started with a BMW GS Adventure as far as adventure bikes go. Over the 7 years, I've done over 140,000 miles on these adventure bikes. But let me just talk about what I learned. Because the big adventure bikes are awesome. I wanted to tour. I wanted to learn to ride a big bike on the road. I wanted to crush miles. I wanted something comfortable. I love that BMW GS Adventure. It was a 1200. I took it across the country multiple times, across Canada to Alaska, down into Baja. I've been all over on it. When I first got it, I really wanted to learn how to control it and have balance with a big bike on the roads. I did a lot of parking lot time and slow maneuver stuff to be able to do a U-turn in the road without having to like put my feet down, or, I took time to learn to ride it on the road, and I never had any problem riding it on the road. I never really dropped it on the road just because I learned the balance. Now the BMW, it's made for the road. It's made to crush miles on pavement. They market it for other things, which it's capable of, but it's best suited for traveling on the road. There's a lot of things that make that possible. It's got a 19-inch front tire instead of a 21-inch front tire. And any goon out there that tells you that a 21-inch front tire is not ideal for an adventure bike, they don't know what they're talking about. That BMW GS Adventure, it has what they call a telly lever front suspension. Now this isn't your typical motorcycle front suspension. It's different. It allows it to shred on the road. I learned to ride in Missouri in the backwoods, tarmac roads, twisty roads that nobody was ever on. And I rode with guys who were fast, so I learned to get faster and I learned technique. It's really good on the road, but when I moved to Vegas, I started riding off-road more and more because there was just hardly any roads to ride, but there was tons of off-road. So as I started riding it off-road, I started learning real quick that front end is just not ideal for off-road. That telly lever, it doesn't give you a lot of sign that you're about to lose the front end. It just goes. And there's so much weight and it's so heavy on the front end that when it goes, and it goes fast. There's not a lot of indication. Now when you're on the street with that telly lever suspension, there's indication that it's starting to go. You'll feel the shake and the wobble in it, and you can back out, and it gives you warning that it's at the limit. But off-road, not the case. So, here I am learning this BMW off-road by myself out in the desert, and I shot some videos. I have a video where I dropped my bike like 12 times in this washout. A lot of people like to give me trouble and say, oh, you don't know how to ride, and you're not going fast enough, and you didn't take this line. But this is the reality, okay? A BMW is a $25,000 motorcycle. And the percentage of people that buy motorcycles and spend $25,000 on a motorcycle is very small. Be lucky if it's 20% of us that buy motorcycles are spending $25,000 on one motorcycle. Now there's more expensive motorcycles, but the BMW 25. A lot of people don't spend that kind of money on a motorcycle, and then when they do, they don't want to tear it up. They don't want to scratch it. They don't want to be banging it up, dropping it. So that's why the big joke is that people that own BMWs, they just go to Starbucks. Well, because they don't want to tear their stuff up. There's a small percentage who buy those motorcycles, a $25,000 adventure bike, and then they go and they take it off-road, and they're not afraid to scratch it up. They're not afraid to drop it. So it's an even smaller percentage. It's always people that don't own these motorcycles that want to give me trouble. It's always the people who don't own them, don't have the experience with them, don't understand the heavyweight adventure bikes. And they certainly don't understand how it reacts off-road or on-road. They just think like, oh, I have a dirt bike, I got a KTM dirt bike, and I can go anywhere I want on that. So if I had the money and I bought a BMW, I would ride circles around that guy. But it's not the case, because people that spend that kind of money and do take it off-road and have the experience, they don't hassle me because they understand, they have experience, and they understand what it takes to be in that spot and how that bike handles. I love that BMW. It was excellent for traveling around the country. But once I started getting off-road, I learned very quick that it's not convenient to ride that big bike off-road. It's not a pleasure. It could be a liability at times, especially being by yourself. It's a liability. A lot of people will say you shouldn't ride any bike by yourself off-road. Definitely not the big ones, right? But I just learned that it was a handful. And it's not that it's not capable. I get people that come up to me all the time and say, oh, those bikes are capable. I never say that they're not capable. It's just there's so much work just to ride and do the same thing you would on a smaller bike. It's not a pleasure to ride off-road. It's not convenient. It's just... it tires you out faster. It's hard to ride 1,000 miles across the country on a BMW even, to go to a BDR, ride 1,000 miles on a BDR, and then ride 1,000 miles home. It's extremely hard to do that. And that's why so many people take these big bikes and they go to a BDR and they end up quitting or getting hurt, or, you know, they're done. They're just quitting. They don't want to do it. They can't mentally handle it because it's so much. And it is for most of us. I learned that trying to do that with people, right? I learned that riding off-road. I learned that riding to BDRs, riding across the country, riding with other people. And when I put that in my videos, people don't like that. A lot of people just want to think that they would be better if they bought one of those. But it's one of those things that when you say it, and then, you know, 6 months later, the same people that are arguing are, you know, going through the same thing. I have it happen all the time. I'll say this helmet's the best helmet. People argue and say, no, it's not. And then a couple months later, you see them wearing that helmet. I'll say, this is the best backpack you can run on a motorcycle. They'll say, no, it's not. And then 2 months later, they're running the same backpack. It happens all the time. It's just when people get more experience, they realize what I was saying was correct. So I never crashed my BMW on the street, off-road. I never dropped it on the road or in parking lots, anything like that. I dropped it in thick sand. And I made videos of it and I'd put it up, and I don't have a problem putting that stuff up because I want people to see, you know, what I really learned. But, you know, some people want to think that that wouldn't be them. It was just not convenient. It was so much work and so tiring, and I just did not want to work that hard. I felt like I had proved to myself already that I knew how to ride a big bike, and I knew I could do anything I wanted to on that bike. It was just going to take a ton of work to do it. If I made mistakes, it was a higher consequence, and I just wasn't willing to put in that kind of effort. So what I wanted to do, I wanted a more capable off-road adventure bike, and I wanted a lighter adventure bike. After all the research I did, what I chose was the KTM 790 Adventure R. What I learned riding this bike, it is the most capable adventure bike you can buy. The horsepower is phenomenal. The suspension is phenomenal for a stock suspension that you can buy. The riding experience was just phenomenal with it. It really was. And, you know, I toured around the country on it. I did. It wasn't as easy to ride around the country as the BMW GS Adventure was, because there's just so much wind protection and comfort, and at least for me there was. I'm a small guy. I was tucked in behind the burble on the BMW. But the 790 toured really well. You know, I did multiple iron butts with that thing. I did iron butts from South Dakota, 1,100 miles on the 790, no problem. So it had no problem on the street. It was good on the street. And, you know, it's like more than 100 pounds lighter. It had the same weight to thrust ratio, right? You don't miss the power at all. So what did I learn with the 790 off-road? Like, it's super capable off-road. And like, I got the better suspension, and I don't regret the better suspension, you know. People say, oh, they buy these suspensions and you don't need it. I don't know about that. I don't know how somebody can say you don't need that, you know. Like, if you ride slow, you don't need a bunch of horsepower. You don't need good suspension. I don't know that you need a lot of technique. I like having the horsepower because I like to ride fast. And I like having that good suspension because I can ride fast. And when I hit bumps at speed, it ain't maxing the suspension out and chucking me off of it. I think people don't understand what a good suspension is. And a good suspension is going to allow you to hit bumps fast. You can get cheaper dual sports that don't have good suspension, and it's fine until you start going fast, right? If you're just putting around, the suspension is enough. But as soon as you start going fast, it's bottoming out and throwing you and the bike off. I don't regret having that suspension, and I don't regret having that horsepower, and I don't regret having that capability in a big adventure bike. I also learned that they're still heavy as shit. They're still heavy to pick up. They're still tiring, right? I could go a lot more places a lot easier than I could on my BMW, but it was still a lot of work, and it was still not as comfortable or as pleasurable. It could be a liability at times as well. I could get into a lot more and go a lot more places, but I was still working hard to do all that stuff just because of the weight, you know. And I love that 790. I do. I love it. The riding experience is phenomenal. There's other issues, you know, that I had, but all in all, it's not enough to like say I don't love that bike because it's taller. You know, the better suspension means it's taller, and then it's harder to pick up. And you know, again, I shouldn't be riding around by myself, but I would do it. But it taught me a few things. It taught me that I could ride an adventure bike off-road because it was more capable. It made me realize that I'm not that bad of a rider. I'm an intermediate rider at best, but on these big bikes I have experience and I could go through some stuff. I was riding that 790 through thick sand and stuff. It showed that I was a better rider because it was easier to ride off-road. And it made me realize I wasn't that bad, that it's just that BMW is just not ideal for that stuff. And it's the same way. These 790s, 890s, they're capable of all kinds of stuff. You got all kinds of people like Chris Birch that make it look amazing and ride it like it's a little two-stroke, you know, hard enduro and all kinds of stuff. It's very capable, but I realize it's still heavy as hell and just a ton of work that I just didn't want to do. Because when you go on a ride, you're not just getting to sightsee and enjoy. You're worried about dropping that bike and picking it up and getting through terrain, and it takes a lot of energy, you know, just to ride it. And I know people say, well, I rode my 890 through Lockhart Basin, a expert section on, you know, the Utah BDR, but when you watch them, they're duck walking for 70 miles. And they're duck walking just so they don't drop it. And then they could say, oh, I didn't drop it, and I rode through Lockhart Basin, but really, that ain't riding. That's more just stroking ego. You know, we all duck walk at times to keep ourselves out of situations. I learned that, like, the 790 is still a lot of work off-road. Because, you know, back in the day, the 700s, 800s, those were the big bikes. And when I started riding BMW, we didn't have all these other options. It was the BMW GS Adventure and that was it. It was top dog, but that was it. So while these new bikes come in, they give us more options and they're more capable and it's more pleasurable. You can go more places and they're phenomenal on the road and they're pretty damn good off-road for a big bike, you know. But I learned I wanted something even lighter. You know, living in Las Vegas, there's so much off-road here. Just all around the city there's off-road. So I wanted to be able to ride a bike off-road and not be worried about it or overworking myself or exhausting myself just because I'm riding in the desert almost 500-pound adventure bike. So I decided to buy a dual sport. I bought a KTM 350. I have a Honda 450 now, but it was a really good move for me, I believe, because it showed me what kind of rider I really was. And once again, I was a pretty good rider. I was decent. I can't ride at the level I want to ride at, but buying a capable premium dual sport showed me I had fairly good technique. It wasn't as second nature as I'd like it to be, but I had decent technique going. And it made me just realize that I had been struggling with the weight on the other bikes. And I was capable of doing more and more with these bikes as the weight came down. But it showed me that it's easier to learn on these dual sports. It's easier to like make mistakes and recover from it. It's not as exhausting. I can go ride and ride the same ride and I'm not as tired. I'm not even half as tired. I'm not exhausting myself just trying to ride trails. But it also told me that I needed to learn some things, right? If I wanted to be a fast rider, my technique needed to be more second nature. When I rode the premium dual sports, it allowed me to just focus on my riding technique. And when I ride trails, I can look around, I can see stuff. It's like, I don't feel it's a liability for me to ride around by myself on one of these dual sports. Obviously, it depends on how fast you ride. If you ride slow, you got less risk. But I like to ride fast, but I'm not riding 100%. I'm riding like 60%, 65%, right? and I can go where I want. I can see more places. I can enjoy it more. It's more pleasurable. It's just not as tiring. It's just not as much work. It allowed me to learn really what I wanted, what I'm looking for, what my goals were, right? In summary, over the last 7 years riding big adventure bikes, this is what I learned. With the big bikes, the heavyweight bikes, they're freaking heavy. They crush miles. But to me, they're only good for like if you have a passenger or if you're bringing a ton of gear, right? And you're doing mostly on road. And for me, I loved my BMW GS, but I'll never buy another heavyweight adventure bike or anything over 1,000 cc's again. I enjoyed riding it, and I've proven to myself that I can handle a big adventure bike. Okay, and then going to the middleweight. What I learned with the middleweight is these are the ideal motorcycles for most of us. They are. Like if you want a street bike and some off-road, the middleweight adventure bikes are where it's at. And I would say the middleweight adventure bikes are where it's at for most of us because they handle the road very well. You can move around the country. It's a good street bike, but they're more capable off-road than the heavyweights are. And especially like a 790, 890, they're designed more ideally for off-road in mind. Some models are, but the middleweights fit more needs for most people, I think. I'll probably always have a big adventure bike in the 700 to 800 range. But what I learned with the middleweights is there's still a lot of work. They're still heavy. They can still be a liability. They're still not convenient off-road. And so the conclusion that I came to is I just need to be selective about where I go on a bigger adventure bike, a middleweight adventure bike even. And even the experts, riders, they're the same way. The heavyweights, the middleweights, they're being selective about where they go. It's not saying they can't go anywhere you want. You can go anywhere you want. It's just how much work and effort you're willing to put into it. So when I see a trail that's washed out, I'll just turn around. Like, I don't need to prove to myself that I can get through that, or I need to prove to myself every effort that I've tried every effort to get through that, you know. Nowadays, I just learned that I don't want to do that stuff, so I'll stick to tarmac, fire roads, gravel roads. That's what I'm going to do from here on out on big adventure bikes, the heavyweights, or the middleweights. And I know people will say, oh, I ride my middleweight all over in the desert and everything else. But when you get them out in the field, out in the desert, they're like, yeah, well, I don't care to do that. And, you know, they got all the excuses why they're not doing it. So the reality is a small percentage of people are actually doing it. And when they do it, they're trying to prove something to themselves. It's not like, oh, my enjoyment is to go damn near exhaust myself and damn near kill myself trying to ride a big adventure bike through hard shit just to prove a point. But you see it all the time. You know, people talk a big game, but when it comes down to reality, they ain't showing you a whole lot. I've had it happen a lot too. You ride 1,000 miles and then get to a BDR and people are quitting in the first day. What I learned is if you really want to ride off-road, you need like a dual sport. The best option is to buy a dual sport. Ride these smaller dual sport bikes or even premium dual sport bikes off-road. And your learning curve on how to ride off-road will increase drastically. You don't have all this outside noise going on. How, you know, you're working so hard and you're getting exhausted and, you know, you're overheating because you're working so hard and you're making mistakes because you're tired and, you know, it's like a snowball effect. So riding the smaller dual sports allows you to learn the off-road a lot faster. This is my recommendation. If you're not riding two up and bringing a bunch of camping gear, I would say save your money and buy a middleweight adventure bike rather than a full-size adventure bike. You know, spend $16,000 instead of $25,000. But if you think you're going to ride mostly road, buy a middleweight adventure bike. If you want to learn off-road with some road, buy a dual sport. And like the ultimate setup is to have like a BMW 1250 for a road bike and traveling, and then have a dual sport for like off-road and doing stuff. Some of that local riding, some of that off-road riding, some of that more technical riding. Get a dual sport. Now I know not everybody can afford two bikes, but if you can only afford one motorcycle, I recommend choose what fits your riding style the best. If you're going to do mostly road with a little bit of off-road, get a mid-size adventure bike. If you want it more off-road and a little bit on-road, do a dual sport. If it's a first-time bike, I'd probably say a dual sport. You know, just because it's going to be cheaper, give you an idea. It's going to be easier to ride. It's going to give you an idea where you want to go later on. As your riding progresses and your riding goals change, you'll have a better idea of what you want. Me personally, I'm going to have two bikes. Probably a middleweight for traveling and riding on the road, what I call a highway bike. And then a premium dual sport for like riding around locally here in Vegas and go on the streets a little bit, running a bunch of trails, riding the desert, and then like take it places. You know, put it on the truck, put it on the bumper of the car, whatever, take it places and do riding like that. That's my ideal situation. Because you get like all these manufacturers, they're building the 1,000 and up heavyweight adventure bikes. And it's because they're about 4 or 5 years behind everybody else. Everybody wants the medium-sized bikes because they're more ideal. But all the manufacturers are still trying to get out their heavyweights. But the market's already at smaller middleweight bikes. If you have a BMW and you only want one bike, like, I get it. I love mine. Or if you have a middleweight and you only want one bike, like, I get it. You know, who doesn't love motorcycles? I think we love all of them, but I've really liked all these bikes. I feel like the middleweights can fill the role of the heavyweights, so I'll never buy a heavyweight adventure bike ever again, just because I don't need to. But all these motorcycles are capable of doing whatever. If you have enough support staff and buddies helping you, the big adventure bikes can go anywhere, and the middleweights can go anywhere. It's just, it can be a lot of work, so you need help with you. That's kind of my progression. I don't know, you know, this is just my opinion. It's my experience, what I've learned riding these bikes the last 7 years. But it's also, you know, up to you to decide what's best for you. But maybe this helps, maybe not. Just my opinion. But I hope it answers questions for people that might have. And, you know, I'm not the greatest rider, but I have experience riding lots of big adventure bikes. I've pretty much ridden them all. I don't think there's any out there that I haven't ridden. Same goes for the middleweights. Like, they're fabulous motorcycles and they're great, but I'll never try to get carried away with on them. Just to keep myself out of trouble and to not work so hard and to not be a liability to myself, right? Anyway, hope you liked the video. Give me a thumbs up. Got tons of content coming. Appreciate you. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll catch you guys later.